News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently. Don't
miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Maya Forstater wins a landmark victory for free speech, the Tories scramble to pick a new leader, and activists debate whether Anne Frank had white privilege. This is Free Speech Nation. Welcome to Free Speech Nation. People have long said that the culture war is a sideshow to the real business of governance, but this is no longer true. The culture war wins and loses elections. Donald Trump's victory was largely enabled by a backlash against what was perceived as political correctness, whereas Hillary Clinton's attempt to divide the electorate up according to group identity clearly backfired. Even our own referendum about our membership of an international trading bloc degenerated into mudslinging, with Leave voters constantly smeared as racist and bigoted, even though studies repeatedly show that we live in one of the least racist countries in the world. An important question about the future of our democracy was misrepresented, in other words, as a question of good versus evil, a bit like Disney, but without all the catchy show tunes to make it worthwhile. And this is because culture warriors are largely fighting monsters of their own imagination. There was a large protest in London a couple of days ago. People were protesting for trans rights. And while I support anyone's right to protest peacefully, it isn't clear to me what rights trans people don't already have. One protester carried this placard: "You're ignoring the start of trans genocide." I don't disbelieve that this person honestly thinks there's a genocide going on, but on what possible grounds? There have been no murders of trans people in the UK for 3 years, and only 8 have been killed since reporting began in 2008. None at all in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. It's the same story across Europe, with 26 European countries reporting no murders of trans people in the same period. Of course, any violence towards trans people is unacceptable. It's just thankfully not very common. And of course, just because I've never met anyone who hates trans people, that doesn't mean they don't exist. And of course, there are people who are discriminated against for the way they identify. But the point is that such discrimination is already illegal. Everyone in the UK has equal rights under the law. There are societal problems, as there will always be. Genocide? Really? This is why the culture wars only ever seem to escalate, because people are determined to see evil everywhere and to mischaracterise those who disagree with them. Look at the reaction of culture warriors to the Conservative Party leadership race. Jolyon Maugham, the barrister most famous for beating a fox to death with a baseball bat while wearing a kimono, posted this tweet directly to Rishi Sunak: "Do you think the members of your party are ready to select a brown man, Rishi?" And what about this from the activist Dr. Shola Moshogbamimu? Now, in this tweet, she's claiming that Tory leadership candidate Kemi Badenoch seeks to enable white supremacy against black people, even though Badenoch is black. And Dr. Shola finishes her tweet with the charming phrase, "She can crawl back into her mother." Why is it that so many of these activists who claim to be on the right side of history are so unpleasant and lacking in basic human empathy? And then there's this from Nadine White, the race correspondent for The Independent. Can you imagine a black or Asian person leading the Conservative Party? Well, yes, we can, because Boris Johnson's cabinet was the most ethnically diverse ever. And whatever you think about the Tories, they've had far more ethnic minority cabinet ministers than Labour ever has, 3 times as many, in fact. So anyone asking this question is obviously so committed to their fantasy world that they can no longer pull away from it. Culture warriors reduce everything to good and evil, and they tend to do so along the lines of group identity. This is why they call everyone who disagrees with them on any point racist, homophobic, transphobic, even fascist. And when decent people who believe in equal rights for everyone are smeared in this way, they naturally become resentful. But this is the lesson lost on the culture warriors. You'd have thought that having called everyone racist if they supported leaving the EU and then losing that referendum, and then calling anyone who supported the Tories racist and losing the general election too, these people might reflect and understand that maybe calling everyone racist isn't exactly a winning strategy. But no, obviously, it's just that they didn't call people racist enough. And now they're even saying that a black candidate for the Tory leadership would be complicit in white supremacy. This is nuts. So we're dealing with fantasists here, but they are powerful fantasists. Culture warriors have infiltrated all of our major educational, artistic, civic and corporate institutions. They're completely entitled to have a voice, of course, but at the moment they are dominating society with their bullying and intimidating tactics. Why else would schools be teaching kids that there are over 100 genders? Why else would councils be removing statues and renaming streets, even though poll after poll reveals that only a very small minority are supportive of such revisionism? Why else would employees at major corporations be sitting through training sessions which berate them for their white privilege and unconscious biases? Why else would the College of Policing, the body that instructs our law enforcement agencies, be ignoring the High Courts and the Home Secretary when they're told that the investigation of non-crime hate incidents is unlawful? And the Tories have, frankly, been hopeless at addressing this problem. They've even contributed to it. Labour have been somewhat worse, but at least they're not in power. Yet. So actually, it is important that our next Prime Minister knows what a woman is and is brave enough to say it out loud. It is important that our next Prime Minister stops kowtowing to activists who say we need to erase our cultural heritage, remove books from shelves that they find offensive, and put the luminaries on the past on trial for wrongthink. It is important that our next Prime Minister asserts the centrality of freedom of speech, without which none of our other freedoms can possibly exist. That's why the Tories need to choose a new leader who is actually going to tackle these culture warriors, these fantasists who are trying to drag us all onto their fairy tale battlefield to scrap with the ghosts of their fevered imaginations. While activists have so much power in society, you need a government that is willing to stand up to them. My studio guests this evening are Darius Davis and Josh Howie. How are you both? It's been a while, Darius.
Good.
You haven't been on for a couple of months, have you?
No, yeah, but it's nice to be back.
Yeah, I mean, it's because you were so terrible last time.
Yeah,
We thought, let's just bench him,
Yeah.
you know, and he'll come back more refreshed.
I'm refreshed.
You
I'm
look
ready
like
to
it.
go.
How are you, Josh?
I'm good, mate. Are you all right?
I'm okay. I'm like, we've got
a new tie.
It's actually an old tie. It's just that I've only recently started wearing ties on the TV, whereas I used to just rock up wearing anything.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, now I've made an effort, and people are, you know, now there's a pressure because I have to get a different tie for every show. Basically, it's going to be
So
expensive.
sorry for you.
Yeah. It's so. I do have a hard life.
Got tie privilege.
Tie privilege. Yeah. I am the victim here. Anyway, let's get some questions from our audience. We've got a question here. Who's this from? Louise. Hello.
Hi. When we teach the facts of life to kids, should that include sex work?
Yeah, so this was a massive story. It broke a couple of days ago in the Times, and you must have seen this. So this was an investigation into sex educationalists, providers of education in schools. They come from the outside of the schools. They're bought in, basically, by the schools, and they've been teaching the kids some pretty dodgy stuff. Things like sex work is a rewarding job, and they've been talking about how kinks, such as being slapped or locked in a cage, are OK. And, I mean, Josh, you spoke about this last night on Headliners, and you were quite animated about it, quite understandably so. Do you want to tell us a few more of the things they've been suggesting? Because it does boggle the mind.
Yeah, I mean, they're teaching kids this sort of gender ideology of hundreds of genders.
Yep.
They're teaching... There was, like, a 14-year-old writing about whether it was safe to have intercourse with a 16-year-old, and he was talking about, like, would she get pregnant? He was like, no, you're not going to get pregnant. but not saying, by the way, what you're doing is actually illegal. And
You would
also
think that would be
then
emphasised.
recommending
Lubricants.
with a type of sex.
I mean, it's
You're not
just
gonna get.
absolutely incredible, isn't it? I mean, there have been debates for years about sex education in schools, but surely there has to be, we shouldn't be encouraging illegal behaviour, for one thing. What do you think, Darius? Did you read this article?
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. If a random person just went in the school and started saying these things, they'd be arrested for grooming children.
Right.
But they're being actively invited in, and they're being told, oh, sex work is a rewarding job. You're 13. That's an aspirational career for you. To be fair, it's probably better than working at McDonald's, but that's not the point, right? That's not the point. But it's crazy. It's like kids don't need to learn about kinks. Why do you want to teach kids kinks?
Well, I suppose, I mean, when I posted a tweet about this, and of course you get odd responses on Twitter, but one of the complaints was, well, children are going to learn about this stuff anyway, so it's better that we equip them.
This is nonsense, right? 'Cause I've had this debate before. The debate is, oh, you don't know what kids are going to do when they're on their phones. They've got access to their phones. This is the situation, right? Your kid goes to school from 9 till 3, right? He wakes up at 8, so they're in your house, right? They come back from school 9 till 3. They've got no phone, right? The phone's put into the teachers. Finish school at 3. They're home from 4 till they go to bed, whatever time. You're watching your children, so you need to take an active stance into what is your child doing online and what are they looking at.
Harder than that, though. I mean, I don't understand. Josh, you've got many kids and I have none, so you're better equipped to talk about. Isn't it quite difficult to keep track of what the kids
It is actually a little bit difficult because for my son, he's like spending 2 hours a day on bus trips and whatever.
Right.
There's friends, they go around to play dates, and now the parents might not have locks on their internet. So this stuff can seep through, and there is a necessary, I think it is necessary to teach your kids somewhat, certainly that if they see this stuff, that it's all essentially a lie.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, getting into the nitty-gritty of this stuff is a very different thing. And I think what people don't appreciate is, it's what you're exposed to, it seeps into you and becomes part of you. And it's why you really do have to be so aware of the information. And when teach these kids that these things exist, I don't want them to know this stuff. Even I don't like knowing it exists,
Yeah, so you don't take this argument that, well, they need to be taught because they're bound to encounter it.
No, and that's what I was saying, is a Labour MP for Brighton, who's this ridiculous crank, he was basically saying that, that you have to teach them, this choking thing, because otherwise they could die. Look, that's very sad, and I believe he had a personal tragedy, but the point is, this is an example I made last night, if someone dies of a drug overdose, you don't then go and teach kids how the proper way to, inject or whatever it is. It's a stupid argument.
It's so strange that this has become a left-right thing as well. This is absolutely bizarre.
I don't think it is, a sort of left-right. It goes beyond that, and I think it's adults taking our eyes off the ball because of this inclusivity thing, which is a good thing when it is teaching, children that relationships come in all shapes and sizes and families come in all shapes and sizes. But when they're trying to be so inclusive that they're just fitting in the kink and the madness, that's where it goes wrong.
Yeah, well, let's get another question now. This one's from Ryan. Ryan.
Hi there. Who do you think will come out on top in the Tory leadership race?
Right, I love this question. I mean, we've been talking about this all week, and there's all these various candidates are sort of emerging, and everyone wants to be Prime Minister, it seems. Maybe I should go.
Yeah, you should.
Well, I'm not a Tory, but it doesn't matter, does it?
You've got a tie.
Yeah, and Boris Johnson wasn't a Tory either, so he did it.
Got funny hair.
There we go. What do you think?
I think there's going to be we haven't seen all the entrants yet. I think there's going to be
There's going to be more.
I think there's going to be...
I can't keep track of the numbers there are already.
I mean, the Tories have made a big mistake because, first of all, what's guaranteed is that once again Britain will have the least attractive leader of the free world. Right? That is guaranteed. All the candidates have, faces for radios and voices
I don't think
made for SAG.
That's not true.
Yeah,
I don't
it's
think
true.
so. What's it? Kemi Badenoch?
Are we actually seriously going to go through the ones we find attractive?
I'm just saying. That's not she's a very beautiful woman. That's crazy.
This is ridiculous. I think we're wrong.
Jeremy Hunt, I do him.
Tom Tugendhat's very handsome.
No.
I think this is wrong. But your sexual taste aside...
I think...
don't you vote...
OK, so I think the Tories have made... First of all, I think a lot of the general public will be looking at this and the Tories have stabbed Boris in the back. And what the Tories have forgotten is that all the candidates so far that I've seen, they're all so bland and boring and have zero personality. say what you like about Boris, but the guy had personality, had so much personality, he got flipping Northern Labour voters to switch to Conservative.
Yeah?
None of them are going to vote for whoever the hot one is that you said. Not happening. Not happening.
Well, maybe. Well, Josh, what do you think?
Well, put that, like I said, Kemi Badenoch, when I finally know how to pronounce her name properly, Badenoch.
I think it's Badenoch.
Badenoch, OK. From what I've seen, just reading her statement that she put out in the newspapers,
it was good.
It was a good one, and and hearing her speak in Parliament about certain issues, it seems to be like she's the best fit. She's a woman. She's black. She's incredibly intelligent. She worked in McDonald's. Now going down the route, you know.
I think people have said though that she doesn't have enough experience and things like that.
Yeah, but I believe she has more experience than David Cameron did when he started leading the Conservative Party.
Yeah.
Mind you, that's not necessarily a good example.
No. Maybe not. But it'd be interesting to see because you've got some backbenchers. You know, it seems like absolutely everyone is sort of going for it. I mean, I don't know, but I think they do have to address these culture war issues because I think it does underpin so much of the Red Wall as well. Actually,
and I think this has been the really interesting thing, and you're seeing this on Twitter today. They've had to step into it.
Yeah.
And that has been because the conversation has moved forward in the last few years. Talking about, certainly this thing about women's rights and trans rights and stuff, before they could sort of ignore it or and it's interesting now that a lot of these people who are going forward to be PM, like they're making that almost like their first statement.
Well, it's tough, isn't it? Darius, what is a woman?
Someone who wasn't a man.
OK.
Someone who's never been a man.
Someone who's never been...
No, because that includes me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, so
I don't know if that... It's a harder question than you think. Actually, it's not. Anyway, let's move on to another question now. We've got a question from Lorenza. Hello.
Do you think Prince Harry's memoirs will be worth the wait?
Oh, Prince Harry's memoirs. I mean, we've been hearing about this in sort of drip-fed information about it for a while now. There's a new list of upcoming book releases. It's not on there. This is something that's just been reported this week. And now we're thinking it's not going to come out this year, after all. So, what do we think?
Well, I think, first of all, every single deal that they've signed, nothing's ever happened. Like, they've made so much money with their podcasts and their document and all this stuff, and they've never actually produced anything yet.
Not the Netflix thing, that didn't happen.
Yeah, they've just taken all of this money.
You a fan of Harry and Meghan?
Not really, but I empathise with Prince Harry not getting his book out on time because I've got an Edinburgh show coming out, so I know exactly how he feels.
Oh, yeah. Have you written it yet?
No.
You need to get a ghostwriter like he did.
Yeah, but I will.
Haven't you got, like, a few weeks?
Yeah.
OK.
Yeah,
well, this is a really great advert for Darius' show, everyone. We're really prepared.
I'm doing my old show.
Oh, are you?
It's a 5-star show, so I'm going to take my time and do it.
You rescued that one.
But, yeah, I don't know. Prince Harry, I empathise with his position, but, yeah, they never bring their stuff out.
Yeah, but do you think his book is going to sink the royal family? I mean, all these...
Oh, nothing's going to... Listen, how much am I allowed to say?
Not much. It's a pre-watershed show, Darius.
OK, well... If a car going through a tunnel never sunk.
Right, let's leave it there. Josh, what do you think? I mean...
No, I want to talk about what Darius is saying.
I mean, don't you think, though... this article that came out this week about the book, about Harry's book, and they were talking about how Buckingham Palace are breathing a sigh of relief.
Yes.
I mean, is that really... Do they really care?
Well, no, I think they absolutely do care. I mean, I wonder if... This is going to sound terrible, but maybe they put it back a bit. They don't want to upset anybody who's slightly elder within the family.
Is he really going to be slagging off all his relatives? I mean...
Well, it depends what they've done.
It's not very classy, is it?
Well, he's, you know...
It's Prince Harry. I don't know what I was thinking.
Holding him up to?
I don't know what I was thinking there, sorry. Let's move on now to another question from Mary. Mary.
Hi. Is this row at the National Trust finally coming to an end?
OK, so the National Trust has kicked off again. There seems to be a National Trust story every couple of weeks in these whole culture wars. And this is the new chairman of the National Trust, who's called Rini Olivieri, I hope I pronounced that right, tried to draw a line under the woke row which has blighted the charity. Olivieri says, "We are all entitled to ask different questions about the past. A new view, however, does not supersede its predecessors, nor can it eclipse other perspectives." Now, this is interesting because the National Trust has been accused repeatedly of sort of woke-washing everything and sort of, making the staff wear rainbow lanyards and putting stuff about LGBT history and black history and connections with the slave trade, even though a very, very small minority of the properties have connections with the slave trade. What's going on here?
Yeah, well, I think that he's trying to sort of, actually in a weird way de-wash it or something, but it doesn't work because it's already, the damage has been done.
Yeah, people don't trust it. Because it used to be that you go to these properties to have scones and strawberries.
Yeah.
You know.
Not necessarily. And look, there's nothing wrong with more education, but I think the point is that he's sort of saying that they can be side by side, but I feel it's that what's happened is that one narrative has actually replaced the previous narrative, rather than them being side by side.
What do you think? Are you a fan of the National Trust property?
I think this is a very particularly white problem. Because I've never been to the National Trust. I thought it was a park. Well,
there are parks.
Yeah, well, no, but I mean, it's just they're trying to remove the history. They're pulling down statues, and now he's trying to backtrack because obviously he didn't realise that people with pink hair who like to pull down statues don't generally go out for scones and tea. And once again, they're alienating their core demographics and their core audience.
That's the weird thing about this stuff. Why do... I mean, of all the people to sort of woke wash, the National Trust...
Yeah, why?
It's like, it's octogenarians wanting an afternoon out.
Yeah, I don't know what...
I mean, I don't understand... Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they thought it was suddenly all these intersectional feminists want to turn up, you know, to the whatever. Yeah, I'll get you a membership, by the way,
yeah,
Darren,
thanks, man.
I think you need it. Let's get a quick question now before the break. This is from Tony, who came through on our email feed. Are Twitter users suggesting Anne Frank has white privilege, the most deluded yet? Well, it's got to be close, hasn't it? There's been these debates going on this week about whether Anne Frank, of all people, who was obviously murdered by the Nazis, benefited from white privilege while she was alive. And the thing is, they're not joking, right? So you think that these people, these activists, they really mean this. They did the same with Helen Keller. They were talking about, you know, yes, you know, she was obviously severely disabled and had all this hardship, but she still was white and therefore was privileged. Darius, is this a nonsense?
Well, anything on Twitter now is a nonsense, but this is a particular nonsense. You know, girl. Well, Anne Frank, she died. She was killed by Nazis, and they're saying, oh, she had white privilege because she.
It's actually really grim.
Yeah,
it goes beyond being funny, and it's just grim.
It's offensive. I mean, I'm not Jewish. I mean, Josh, you're Jewish. I find that offensive.
Josh?
As you know.
No, I'm full of rage. It's hard to articulate myself here. I will say, like, to that person writing that tweet, check out the Nuremberg laws.
Right.
The whole point in them was that Jews weren't white. The idea that Jews are white or white supremacists, when, you know, a third of our total number was murdered, who were very definitively not white, and you go to a place like Israel, and, you know, the majority of Jews in Israel are people of colour. You can't put... just because Jews don't fit neatly into this box of that critical race theorists want them to, and importing American racial ideas to the UK or around the rest of the world.
Yeah.
It's like that's what they're trying to do. You've got these CRT protests in America, and they're sort of talking about white supremacy in Israel. Go to Israel. Everybody's a person of colour. It's ridiculous.
This is it. I mean, when you get the kind of Robin DiAngelo worldview and everything, it is... CRT does reduce everything to white and black. It can't see anything else. It can't see nuance. It can't see complexity. And even someone like... I mean, I just find it astonishing. I can't believe that it was even raised. But the trouble is they're not joking.
No.
And you will have seen Whoopi Goldberg's comments about how the Holocaust was just two groups of white people. It was about white privilege. I mean, what is this? Is it just historical illiteracy?
No, I think it's anti-Semitism.
Right.
That's what I think it is. And Whoopi Goldberg's comments there, just reducing it to sort of white-on-white crime or whatever. It's like, can you just read a history book, please? And please not nullify our history and the greatest tragedy of my people.
It's funny because the activists always use that phrase, educate yourself. But these people never read any books other than Robin DiAngelo, Ibram X. Kendi, you know, or the usual...
You've got Coldplay this week hanging out with Farrakhan and saying what a great... It's like, by the way, he's a massive anti-Semite. Yeah. What are you doing?
Yeah. Any thoughts, Darius?
I don't like Coldplay.
Well, with that, we've got to go to a break because that was an intense...
You like Farrakhan.
I like Farrakhan. Cool guy.
Yeah,
it's got too intense in here. After the break on Free Speech Nation, we will be discussing a new report from campaign group Don't Divide Us, which says 1 in 4 councils are promoting contentious educational practices. See you in a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV. On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
On Mark Dolan tonight, entrepreneur and star of TV's Dragon's Den, Duncan Bannatyne. In The Big Question, who should be Britain's next Prime Minister? We'll hear from former Conservative Minister Anne Widdecombe. My Mark Meets guest is reality TV legend James Argent, who'll be talking fame, money, 14 stone in weight loss and the future. Plus, I'll be dealing with Prince Harry, who's got a touch of writer's block. That's in my take at 10. And in my big opinion, I'll be revealing my choice for next Prime Minister. See you at 9.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. A report by the campaign group Don't Divide Us says almost 1 in 4 councils are promoting, quote, contested models of anti-racism in their education policies and guidance. According to polling released in the study, the majority of parents think schools should teach in a non-partisan way. Here to discuss this report with me, I'm delighted to welcome Alka Sehgal-Cuthbert, the Chief Executive of Don't Divide Us. Alka, can you just give us a background to what Don't Divide Us do as a group?
OK, we're a campaign group that challenges, wherever we can, divisive ideas and beliefs along race lines that are being promoted in our institutions and through kind of culture more generally.
Yes.
Because we we believe that we actually, you know, our common humanity is indivisible.
Yes.
And these ideas that are being promoted, and it's a new ideology piggybacking off of older ideas of anti-racism that most people share. That's what's got us to the point we are today. And these are being introduced in schools, which is particularly egregious, really.
I think that's what's confusing a lot of people, because a lot of the ideas that are coming into schools are branded as anti-racism. And, of course, we're all opposed to racism, and teachers have always been, well, not always, but, you know, of late have. So where's the confusion here? How can you explain
OK,
that?
can I explain a really important difference? I've been thinking about this a lot. But, right, the old anti-racism, if you like, was where the default assumption was Britain is an OK society and it has some problems. There was a broad belief in equality and tolerance, those Enlightenment values, and we would look around and we would see some individuals who belonged to particular groups were being discriminated against, were not being treated equally. And we fought together across ethnic lines in order to uplift those people who were disadvantaged so they would join the majority and have equal rights. The new anti-racism is the complete opposite. It is about using minorities, really appropriating, talk about cultural appropriation, appropriating the said experiences of minorities, including like myself, and using it to basically trash majority ideas and majority values by saying you're all unconsciously biased, whether you like it or not,
So
whether
those
you
are the
intend it or not.
Those are the kinds of things that are being taught in schools. The idea of every white person is potentially complicit in white supremacy just by virtue of being white, that they are all privileged irrespective of their economic backgrounds. And we can see sometimes that this leads to open division, such as the American school, which segregated children by race after school. And that's a London-based school. It's called the American school, but it's a London-based school. And they did that for extracurricular activities. So your report now is really focusing on how commonplace these ideas are. Because when I've spoken about this in the past, people have said, but you're relying on anecdotal evidence from a few teachers that you know. And that was true.
Yes.
What does this study tell us?
Right, this study, we did this study. We sent out 173 FOIs to councils in England and Wales.
And that's freedom of information requests.
Yes, sorry, and that was on the back of our campaign in Brighton and Hove that I believe you've covered before. We still haven't got a proper answer about what happened in Brighton and Hove. And we thought, is this an outlier? Is this just like one council gone bonkers? Or is it more widespread? So we thought, what should we do? We didn't have the resources to contact every single school in the country, but we thought the councils are that mid-level between national legislation, national government, and then kind of on the ground locally.
Yes.
So we sent out these FOIs, Freedom of Information requests, and over half of them either didn't reply at all or their replies were really inadequate. I mean,
so they didn't want you to know?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to... You know, the fact is that for quite a long time, since 1988, schools do have local autonomy.
Yes.
So a lot of the FOI, the councils were saying, we don't know this information, contact the individual schools.
OK. OK.
So we
can't assume.
We can't assume, but the point is that if this new anti-racism is so important that it merits this wholesale change that advocates are, saying it should, someone needs to know. We need to know so parents can know.
Well, let's give an example of something we absolutely do know, because the Brighton Council's anti-racist schools strategy, which you challenged quite openly, and all the details were there.
Yeah.
And indeed, I believe the Green councillor, Hannah Clare, I think her name was, said explicitly that it's through the lens of critical race theory. That's the way they see these things. So what are the implications? What kind of thing have Brighton been training their teachers to teach?
Yes, so I mean, what they want to teach children to see colour. Anyone that's got young kids will know that they play quite amicably, and they see colour. Sometimes they don't, the other times, and they see all sorts of differences. But what this new ideology seeks to do is to make it a really important factor, and then also to attribute moral and kind of social status, up or down, positive or negative.
Like oppressed or oppressor.
That's right. You're kind of placed on a grid of power. This is all stuff from abstract theories, right? It does not map onto the reality of everyday life in Britain, where up to now we've had, you just don't think of colour. My husband's white, our children are mixed, and I do not look at my family and think of colour, and yet this is what they want people to be really hypersensitive to.
And that's the ideal of colourblindness, I suppose. Not that we don't notice that people are different, but that we don't treat them differently, right?
Well, that's right. You notice the differences. You can like or dislike or find differences boring, but you don't see them. You understand that we are not determined, that as individuals, what determines us is our own free will, is our own, that's what makes us unique.
And surely that's a more powerful message for kids. I mean, and critics will say, but teachers have to teach critical race theory or this kind of hyper-racialised view of the world, because that's the only way we're going to break down the structures of racism that exist, that are embedded in society. What do you say about that?
Well, look, if any teacher thinks that, they're free to think that in their own time as a citizen, right? As a citizen, they can be free to think whatever they like. As a teacher, they're not. As a teacher, they have a duty and a responsibility to educate. And if they can't tell the difference between politics and education, they shouldn't be teaching.
And it's actually, I mean, you mentioned that because isn't the truth that it's against the law? The Education Act 1986, says that teachers have to be impartial when it comes to these matters.
It does, but I think impartiality is quite a tricky concept. It's not very well understood. And ultimately, the problem is that education for decades has just been beleaguered by so many different bits of policy and legislation. It's completely fragmented. That's really what's allowing this stuff to come in. It's not Machiavellian people sort of pulling this. I mean, some of them are, it's true. But the conditions for allowing this to come in is the fact that it's also fragmented. It's utterly... I mean, you've just got to look at the school bills at the minute that's being discussed. It's a complete mess. There's no vision of what education should be. And if you don't have a clear vision of what you're asking your nation's teaching force to go out and do every day, then you're going to be open to all kinds of instrumental reasons and interferences, and that's what's happening now.
And what does your report, Don't Divide Us report, what are the findings in a nutshell?
Well, we're finding that, that it's very difficult for parents to find out about this, right? I knew what I was looking for. I have had experience researching, and I found it very difficult because when you go onto councils' websites, you can come across an equality, diversity and inclusion statement that looks perfectly banal and quite boring, frankly, or certainly nothing shocking about it. But then if you then sort of do a different search and put in anti-racism and then perhaps and you find something a little bit more, oh, well, this is a bit different. This isn't what was on the main, the main kind of landing page of the council. And then you kind of have to keep clicking through, and then you will find, I'm not saying everybody does this, but the fact that this is happening in a majority of the councils that we've termed biased, because they're the ones who they see schools as places where they want to change society, and that's politics. That's not schools.
Well, that's like teachers being activists, isn't
exactly.
it? And then,
exactly.
But then the problem you're facing, even though you've got this information now, we know that it is prevalent. It's not just a few rogue schools here and there. But then it's because the unions are behind it. The National Education Union openly said we need more activist teachers.
Yep.
They were quite clear about it. They said we need to decolonise every level of the classroom. So when you have activists running the major organisations such as the National Education Union, what hope is there to push back against it? Is it the parents that need to do something?
I think sadly, and I've been a teacher most of my life, and actually I do believe that teachers and parents have the same interests fundamentally, but unfortunately the political context that we're in means parents have really got to start taking an interest and really caring about what their schools are teaching their children. Go in, ask your teachers what is being taught in assemblies, ask to see the materials that they're using. One of our recommendations is that schools should be mandated to publish all the third-party providers on their websites. They have to publish a lot of other information. They should do this as well. And if you find any parents out there, and teachers, we are getting teachers coming to us now, a lot more, who they do not want to be doing this, send in materials, send in examples, because that will help us get a better, finer-grained picture of what's happening, and it will help us develop our case better.
Absolutely, and I should say a lot of people, because they do find all this stuff so confusing, because of the language, anti-racism sounds so positive, but it actually has a regressive thing. So your website, Don't Divide Us website, has lots of resources, explanatory materials, that kind of thing, which people can look at and contact you. So what's the website address for that?
It's don'tdivideus.com. Please do have a look at it. Find out more about what we're doing. Email us, send us in any questions, any materials that you're not sure whether this is really objectionable or is it not objectionable. And, just get in touch. If we're hearing from parents who, it's not just materials, it's the fact that some teachers are taking it upon themselves to, discipline children differently. So you'll get, a really naughty kid in one corner being really awful to the teacher, and another kid who's doing the BLM salute for a joke or something in the playground. The kid doing the BLM salute is sanctioned and disciplined and brought in, and all this, really heavily disciplined. But the kids who are really kind of having a fight and openly challenging the authority of the teacher.
That's fine.
Yeah.
OK, so it sounds very much like politics creeping in there.
Very much so.
I think I do urge people to check out Don't Divide Us website. Alka, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Andrew.
After the break on Free Speech Nation, I'll be joined by Maya Forstater. In the week, she won a landmark ruling at an employment tribunal after a lengthy battle. See you in a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. Later in the show, I'm going to be turning agony uncle with the help of my panel, Darius Davis and Josh Howie. And we're going to help you deal with your unfiltered dilemmas. So don't be shy. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk and we'll do our best to answer your issues. An employment tribunal ruled on Wednesday that Maya Forstater suffered direct discrimination when the Centre for Global Development, where she was a visiting fellow, did not renew her contract. Forstater lost her job after tweeting that transgender women could not change their biological sex. She brought a test case to establish that gender-critical views are protected under the Equality Act, losing that case in 2019 before she was successful in an appeal last year. The case was sent back to the tribunal, who this week upheld 2 complaints of direct discrimination and 1 of victimisation. 2 other complaints of direct discrimination and 1 of victimisation were unsuccessful. Maya Forstater, welcome to Free Speech Nation.
Thank you.
So, this has been such a long process, and I have to say, you know, a lot of media outlets haven't really covered this particularly well. So do you want to take us right back to what's happened at the start and talk us through it?
Yes. So, autumn 2018, this really started. The government was consulting on reform to the Gender Recognition Act, the idea of self-ID. I was working at a think tank. I thought I should be allowed to think about this.
It's a think tank.
Yes,
right?
exactly. And it was a think tank where they didn't take institutional positions, non-partisan, encouraged debate and disagreement. In fact, I got the job there by disagreeing with them about something. So,
right.
So I sort of thought I had a duty to use my voice, which was, sort of 2,000 followers on Twitter, not huge, but I could see that there were people being bullied and silenced, and then there were people like Kathleen Stock speaking up, and it took me about a year of following the debates on sex and gender before I got to the point where I felt like, OK, I know what I think, I'm not a bigot, I've got something to say, and I shouldn't be stopped from saying it. So I tweeted in September 2018 the most boring 4 tweets you've ever written.
Don't do yourself down.
Well, no, I mean, it took me a couple of hours to get up the courage to write them, and it was sort of like, the government is having a consultation about gender self-ID, this matters,
yes.
Here's something to read. You know, they were boring.
But you were essentially saying that, you know, in the reforms to the Gender Recognition Act, there are implications for women's rights.
Right, and that the government is asking for our opinion on it. So, you know, you shouldn't be frightened of giving your opinion when the government's asking us for it. But even so, it took me a couple of hours to sort of get up the courage to write those, and then nothing happened. So I tweeted them, no response. And I was sort of getting more and more concerned and angry about the issue. At the time, Karen White, the rapist, was put in a women's prison. So I started tweeting stories like that were in the news, still getting no response from my followers, who were sort of 2,000 policy wonks, basically, who usually will argue about things. And so about a month into tweeting about it, there was a story about this guy called Philip Bunce, who works at Credit Suisse. He's a banker at Credit Suisse, a married man, sometimes goes to work in a dress and a wig and calls himself Pips on the days when he goes to work in a dress and a wig. And he'd been given this award for women in business. So obviously...
So he'd won an award
yes,
as a woman?
As a woman for women. And he doesn't even claim to be a woman. He just likes to be called Pips and wear a wig.
Right.
So he'd been given this award for women in business, and obviously there was sort of a Twitter storm about that. And so I thought, well, I mean, I was angry about it, but I also thought I'll use this as an opportunity to start a discussion. So I worked in international development, which is quite woke. And one of the things that guys in international development do is say, if I get invited to a conference to speak on a panel and it's all men, I will say to the organisers, can you not find a woman?
Yeah.
And I'll step down. You know, it's a good thing. It's a way of saying women also know about things.
Sure.
And it's a personal pledge. So I asked this question to my followers and said, if you were asked to be on a panel with 2 other guys and Pips Bunce, would you still say, can you find a woman? And it was a way of sort of bringing it down to a very personal level, because otherwise people go, oh, it's sports, the sports bodies will work it out, or prison authorities, you know, somebody else. It's difficult and scary, and I don't want to talk about this.
Yes.
And so I sort of wanted to bring it to a personal question. And it sparked this conversation. So for about 10 days, you know, my Twitter feed went quite busy. And all of these people, some who I knew and some who I didn't, answered me, mainly disagreeing, but politely. And
you wanted
sort
this
of,
conversation,
yes,
right?
exactly, and in detail. And we sort of unpicked, well, you know, why? I mean, I was so surprised that there were people saying, well, if he thinks he's a woman part of the time, then maybe he is or she is, and so
he's a woman part of the time.
Yes.
Okay.
So the discussion went on, and you know, there was sort of 10 days worth of tweets. And what I didn't realise was, so the organisation I worked for, I was in London, but the headquarters was in Washington DC, and this conversation sort of set alarm bells ringing in Washington. And a couple of young female staff went in and complained to HR and said, you know, we're concerned she's making transphobic tweets.
Right.
So I had no idea that this was happening. And then I got an email from HR saying, please, we prefer you not to use exclusionary language, and please put a disclaimer on your tweets.
How did you feel about that, being accused of transphobia, hate, exclusionary? I mean, how did that make you feel?
I was surprised. I mean, I knew when I started, as I said, I was nervous talking about it, but because the organisation I worked for was generally sort of robust, I didn't expect it from them. And so I responded. I mean, I put a disclaimer on my tweets because that's fair enough. It was my own views, not the organisation's, absolutely. And I responded with a sort of email setting out why the concept of women excludes men. And, you know, you have to be exclusionary to have categories that work.
Yes.
And sort of thought, oh, well, that'll sort it. And what I didn't know, and I didn't know this till quite long after, was there were chains of emails and meetings and investigations and all kinds of things going on in Washington. I just put the disclaimer on my tweets and sort of carried on.
So, I mean, then, of course, you lose the job and you know, you appeal this decision. And what happened at that stage?
So it took about 6 months for me to lose my job from that point of tweeting. And what happened was, so when you go to court, you get disclosures. So eventually you get all of the emails that you didn't see at the time.
Oh, so you saw all this stuff?
Yeah, so at the time, I didn't know what was going on, but eventually I found out what was going on, which was they were panicking. And they had a group of consultants who were doing EDI training, so they asked the consultants to help them. Big mistake.
Right.
The consultants then did an investigation on me, looked at my tweets and told them, you know, these tweets are transphobic. And I didn't see the report at the time. And when I did see it eventually, when I went to court, it said things like, Maya Forstater follows Kathleen Stock. And everyone knows Kathleen Stock is a terrible transphobe because, look, these 50 people have written a letter to her university saying she's a terrible transphobe.
So this is very defamatory. It's like as though the accusation is all the evidence that's needed.
Yes, exactly. And the organisation that I worked for, I think they felt like, if they would then say to the EDI consultants, well, we're not sure if this is, is this just a nuanced argument or is it transphobic? Then the finger would be pointed to them. Yes. So sort of once you've started down this road, everything collapses into it because nobody can say, no, that's not transphobic, because it becomes obvious that if you say that, then you'll be the witch as well. So then I lost my job and I tweeted about it, as you do. And what I didn't know was that there were a group of feminist lawyers who'd sort of thought about my case before it existed. So they'd thought about this idea of belief discrimination.
Yes.
And they were waiting for a case. So
then they were able to support you in this?
Yes.
So just so that we move through the timeline, you've lost the job, you appeal it now because you have this support now, that your beliefs should be protected in law. But what did the appeal judge say?
Well, no. So first I went to the Employment Tribunal. Yes. 8 days after tweeting, we put in a claim to the Employment Tribunal. And the first part of that was a preliminary hearing just on this question of belief. Is the belief that sex is real protected under the Equality Act? So religions and beliefs, any kind of religion or philosophical belief, like Scottish nationalism, ethical veganism, there are a whole bunch. There's not a list, there's not a master list, but they get tested. So if you bring a case for belief discrimination, they test it against these criteria. Is it serious? Is it coherent? Does it destroy other people's human rights? So I had to have this belief tested.
But that seems strange because it's not a belief, it's a fact, isn't it?
It is, but the whole belief was that sex is real, immutable and important. So it's not just kind of the biology,
Yes.
If you get down to it, most people will agree with you on biology, but then they'll say, some people say, well, gender identity matters more.
Yes.
So it was the whole package, so you could say that's a belief. And went to court to show that belief doesn't destroy other people's human rights and is coherent and is serious, and lost.
Yes, and the judge used a particular phrase which I thought was a bit chilling. What was that phrase?
Well, not worthy of respect in a democratic society.
That's astonishing.
Well, it is and it isn't. He didn't make that up. That's part of the test. So it's basically, if your belief is Nazism or fascism, then it's not a protected belief. That kind of belief is not worthy of respect.
But the belief
almost anything else is.
The belief that you were promoting here, this idea that, that acknowledgement of biological reality is important for safeguarding, for women's only spaces, domestic violence refuge centres, that kind of thing. How could that fall into the same category as Nazism?
I know. It was absolutely stunning. And part of what happened, I think, is that the judges are trained. So they have this thing called the Equal Treatment Bench Book, which is not the law, but it's what they tell judges about how to run an inclusive courtroom. And lots of that is good stuff. But it has a great big chapter on transgender, which is basically, if not written by Stonewall, it could have been. And it tells them that the law is old-fashioned and that they should use different terminology. And so what I was saying was, I lost my job for saying the definition of sex in law. That's authoritarian. And the judge was working off a different guidebook.
But now the outcome has come your way.
Yeah.
Finally, after all this time. How long has it been?
3 years.
So, and of course, you've been very much under the spotlight. J.K. Rowling, of course, has very famously supported you. But with that, of course, has come a lot of attention, which was helpful, wasn't it?
It was. It was amazing. That she tweeted the day after I lost the first time. So, you can imagine if I was thinking, should I appeal or not? And then J.K. Rowling tweeted, I was appealing. And it's been amazing to have her support. But it also meant that because people wanted to, to say that she was acting in bad faith and lying, they therefore had to say that I was.
Yes.
And so they used me to kind of try and undermine her. So I've had a lot of attention from all sorts.
Do you think it's because, as you said earlier, there was an element of intimidation. You said yourself you thought a long time before having the bravery to tweet out your views on this. A lot of, thank goodness for the few prominent women in society who are sticking their necks out, but a lot of people are scared. And isn't that understandable?
Absolutely. And I think, it's sort of like getting into cold water. Once you're in, you're in.
Yeah.
But it's the people who are sort of on the edge. You can see why, people kind of put their toe in, as Macy Gray did this week, and get pounced on and intimidated to the point where they just say, this is not worth blowing up my life for.
Yes.
And that's really done to kind of police the space and stop people talking about it.
But your case is so important because it is now established as a precedent in law that this is a protected belief, which will hopefully mean that, whenever women will feel more comfortable expressing this belief.
Yeah, women and men. And I mean, already from when I won the appeal, I've heard from so many women particularly who've said, this has helped them at work. They kind of say my name. And it makes HR investigations go away, or at least makes them think twice. So even if people don't get to court, it's helping to make that space where they can speak more freely.
And how does it feel when being the centre of this storm, having people accuse you of these awful things? I mean, I've seen people say things about gender-critical feminists, that they're the same as Nazis, the same as fascists, and just essentially hateful. But your view of trans people isn't hateful.
No, I mean, it's awful. You get used to being abused on a daily basis, and you start to think that's normal, and have people lie about you and make up stories and call you the most awful things, and after a while, to cope with it, you just think, well, that's normal.
Yeah,
but it's not.
So how do we move beyond that? How can we? Is it through the law ultimately that we're going to have to address this?
I think it's partly through the law, and it's got to be through institutions getting their purpose back. I mean, the think tank that I worked for wasn't a social justice think tank. This wasn't what it did. It could have not gone this way if it had kept its eye on its purpose, which was, evidence-based policy.
Yes.
And if it had had leadership to say, no, we're not going down a witch hunt. And we've seen that, like Reading University recently, they had this big pylon saying, you mustn't have this gender-critical professor in to give a lecture.
Yes.
And the Vice-Chancellor just said, no,
yes,
we're here for freedom of speech. It takes the law, but it also takes leadership, and it takes institutions finding their purpose and their mission.
It doesn't help, does it, though, that groups like Stonewall say no debate is the element to this, whereas in your case, what was very interesting is finally people were on the stand having to answer the questions about gender identity ideology that they've just fudged in the past.
Yes.
That was a particularly interesting thing to read.
Yes, yeah, that it was. It was like the Scopes trials. It was. And there were 4 witnesses from the Centre for Global Development, all from the US, and they looked like they were giving evidence against the mafia. Basically, they had to present the gender ideology view, and you could see that across the 4 of them there were different degrees of buy-in.
Yes.
But if you don't demonstrate buy-in, then the kind of people watching would paint them with the same things that they painted me.
And finally, because we're out of time now, but I do want to ask you finally, what is your advice to people who are in your situation, who are getting pressure from HR or managers or whatever, and they feel, well, maybe I should just shut up and go along with it and use my pronouns in my email signature and say that gender is more important than biological sex. What's your advice to those people?
I don't tell people to go and blow up their life. Not everyone can do that. But, you do have protection of, use your organisational policies, use your whistleblowing policy, put things in writing, don't swear, don't, do it as politely as you can, but say what you need to say. And, lots of people go through questions and investigations and they do go away, and we don't see that because it's sort of under the waterline. So, I wouldn't tell people to say nothing, but at the same time, they don't have to go kamikaze.
Yes, absolutely. Well, however hard it's been, I think what you've done is incredibly important, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maya, for starting, everyone. Coming up on Free Speech Nation, we'll have more questions from our viewers, plus Green Party politician Shahar Ali and comedian Konstantin Kissin will be live in the studio. Don't go away.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. So let's get some more questions in from our viewers. Our first question is from Anna, and Anna has emailed in and said, are female rugby players now in danger of sustaining serious injuries? So this comes after former professional swimmer Sharon Davis launched an attack on the RFU as they have not as yet banned transgender players from the sport. Now, obviously, we were just talking to Maya for starter about the importance of recognising biological sex. I would have thought in rugby, when people are colliding with each other, because it's not a contact sport, it's a collision sport, right?
Yeah, this is like the definitive example of why biological men shouldn't be competing against women. And I just want to say one thing that they keep on saying in these, they're banned, trans people are banned from sport. They're not banned from sport, they're banned from competing against the wrong sex class, i.e. they can still play that sport, they can still compete in that sport, just not against people where it's unfair, and in this case, with the rugby union, unsafe.
I mean, their argument would be, we've got to be fair to people who feel, for whatever reason, that they need to present as the other sex or transition, and they've got rights as well. And if that's their passion to play rugby,
why don't we be fair to the people who are really rubbish at rugby?
Well, that's a good point. I'm pretty rubbish at rugby.
Yeah, you should be playing on the women's team. You should be playing for the women's England team. But this is scary. And the thing is, the World Rugby was one of the first sports institutions that were actually brave enough to go, you know what, let's get some scientists in, let's actually look at the physical evidence. Yeah. They found all this evidence was like the structure of the men, our skeletons, just even our hearts, the way we process oxygen, different from women, more efficient in terms of strength and performance than women. So they were one of the first organisations, and yet the English or the British World Rugby Association or whatever have just absolutely chickened out of taking a stance.
I mean, look, I used to teach at a school where the kids played rugby. It was a boys' school. I remember a time where half of my class were in sort of like slings and sort of, like casts and everything, broken limbs everywhere. And I thought, this is a boys'... I know they're a girls' rugby team, but, you can't put the two together, can you?
I used to play rugby, and I was quite small at the time when I was like 13. I was like, other 13-year-olds were like shaving, and I'm like, you're a man, why am I playing against you? But this argument is slightly more nuanced than it appears, because the RFU have banned professional rugby, they've banned whichever way it is that they're not allowed to play against. So men can't play in women. So they banned that way. But what they've done for not the professional game is there's weight class. So they weigh the players and make sure they're kind of in the balance. For me, I think if you transition, I think you make sacrifices to transition to the sex that you perceive yourself to be.
Yes.
And I think you lose stuff. In your transition, you're just going to lose. And one of those things you should lose is the ability to play rugby against... If your passion is rugby, your choice is your passion rugby, is your choice or are you a woman? One of them has to go. Well, that's how I feel. I think you lose your...
I don't think this argument's going to go away anytime soon. Anyway, let's get another question now. We've got a question from David. Where's David?
He's having a wee.
Oh, he's out of the room. He's out of the room. OK, well, that's all right. I do know that he was going to ask about this. Have you heard about this? The government have announced that they're bringing in new laws on Tuesday which are going to prevent Labour and Liberal Democrat councils from unilaterally changing street names by giving residents the right to vote on those changes. So this is an interesting one, because I was talking earlier about people wanting to change lots of street names and tear down lots of statues. Do you think there's a case here, Josh?
Yeah, I'm just interested how you knew that David was going to ask that question.
Because I spoke to him before the show.
Oh, I see. OK. That's how you're dealing with your fan base.
Yeah, exactly.
I
talk to people, Josh.
Well, you are better than I. So, yeah, I think this is a good idea. I think, of course, this is people's homes. This is where they live. This is their environment. Of course, the local people should be involved in the naming of their streets.
Yes.
It makes absolute sense.
Have you seen some of the street names, though? I've seen people replacing things with, like, when there are problematic figures from the past, like Winston Churchill and Mahatma Gandhi. Apparently, he's problematic as well. They change the names to things like Diversity Avenue and Inclusion Close.
Yeah,
do you think that's a good
idea? I'd love
idea?
to live on Inclusion Close.
Yeah. Do you think that's a case for that?
I think it's ridiculous. It's... who was the mayor? Sadiq Khan's put £1 million for changing the names of problematic names. £1 million. Like, your buses are getting cancelled. Like, there's bus routes that you're cancelling, taking away. That £1 million could be done that actually serves people. No one cares about their names. A tiny minority cares about their name, and they're just trying to change the history so that, oh, this didn't happen. We know it happened. Most people are happy with Winston Churchill. Yeah, he was a product of his time. He did stop the Nazis. So, we
Yeah, I mean, you give him some kudos for stopping the Nazis.
Just a little bit.
It's more than I've done.
Yeah, well...
I've stopped a few Nazis, but not that many. No, but this is the thing, like, there's also something about cultural heritage, I think, about having the names of streets and the names of statues and the names of places tie us to the past in a really interesting way. I read Peter Ackroyd's book on London, and he talks about Houndsditch. And for years, we didn't know why it was called Houndsditch. And then there was an archaeological excavation, and they found loads of dead dogs. This was the place where people used to dump their dead dogs. It was a ditch for hounds.
Now they should rename it, what, Cat House?
Cat House. Cat Heaven.
Cat Heaven, yeah.
It may be, but I think there's something potent about the past that, we lose something at our peril if we just ditch this stuff.
Absolutely, and maybe, like with some of these statues or whatever, let's describe them properly about why there may be an issue there, but they are part of our history. They want to change... They were looking at changing Tulse Hill. Yeah. I don't know who Tulse is from... it's interesting to find out about their connection, but to name a whole part of London with whatever, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's mad. Anyway, let's move on now. Have we got another question? Yes, we've got a question via email. This is from Catherine. Catherine says, it takes a lot to annoy the Scrabble community. Does it, Catherine?
What?
Okay. Have Mattel gone too far? So, I mean, I read about this earlier in the week, because it was it's one of those things... I've heard a few stories about Scrabble pop up now and then, and obviously they've banned over 400 words in official Scrabble tournaments. And, like, my mother's got the official Scrabble words book, which is why she always wins. But this is banning any words that sort of have a slur on race, sexuality, gender. But that really limits the words you can... And it's a difficult game. You need every option, right?
It definitely limits my words, anyway.
Yeah. You will, of course, not say the words.
I would never say them out loud, but I'd definitely use them in Scrabble.
In Scrabble, that's part of Scrabble is colloquialism, right? So it's not like if you use a homophobic slur on a Scrabble board, it means you endorse homophobia. It means those are the letters you've got.
Yeah, and those words still exist.
Right.
And so, but the company seems that Mattel has gone out of its way to go, hey, how can we get involved in this whole debate? What steps can we take here? And cutting 400 words out, it's a big deal. Now, I happen to be particularly rubbish at Scrabble. I know you're a big...
I'm a beast at it.
You're a beast, yeah. Absolutely. I can imagine you. But, for me, it's like, if you take away the word we, or whatever, or poo...
That's your whole repertoire.
I'm in serious trouble.
but also, some words have two meanings. So what they might consider a slur, I might consider a delicious Welsh delicacy. So what do they... or an American slang for cigarettes. So they don't know what I mean when
they're getting into your thoughts, Darius.
Getting in their thought police.
I'm fed up with these Scrabble people getting in my mind. Stay out of my mind, Mattel. Right, we've got another question now from Rachel, who tweeted us. Here, well, that's nice. We don't normally get tweets. OK. Free Speech Nation. The question was, is it right that a British classic such as The Railway Children be given an American twist? And so there's a new version of The Railway Children. I've actually never seen the original, to be honest. But they've pointed out that the new version of the classic story apparently involves evacuees combating racism in the American Armed Forces. And although I haven't seen the original, I don't think they did that.
No, I mean, you would have watched the original if it had, like, killer dolls in it.
Yeah.
Or something like
Love
that.
that stuff. Some sort of... Killer leprechauns as well.
Yeah, no, I haven't seen the original either, although, of course, it's meant to be a classic. But, yeah, what they've done here is that they've sort of thought, how can we make this more relevant? One thing they did is change the setting. They moved it to World War II. I think that's actually quite a clever idea. But then they've sort of racialised it or brought in this racial element. And they've actually... But my understanding is it's based on a true story of a black serviceman from America being over here and how the white residents supported him and after he was sort of went on the run or something from being beaten up, which is a really interesting story. But the combination here, it's like then it's like a mishmash of genres in a way.
Yeah, that is a bit odd. I mean, why not tell that story? Just tell that story.
Absolutely.
And but that's because I do worry about this anyway. When they Americanise. Yeah. I don't like the Wicker Man. Did you see the American version of the Wicker Man? They moved from a Scottish island to an American island. Rubbish.
I didn't see that, but apparently the Railway Children, originally they wanted to update it to be set in the UK in 2022, but then the story wouldn't have happened because they'd have been on strike. So they had to move it.
Fair enough. All right. Let's move on now to a final question from Ian, also on the Twitter feed. Our Twitter feed is exploding tonight. This is great. So his question is, was the Rockstar protest against Spotify just another performance? So you remember when there was this big protest about Joe Rogan's podcast, which was obviously Spotify famously bought for many, many millions of dollars, and people were accusing him of spreading misinformation about COVID, and various people said, well, we're going to take our songs off Spotify unless you get rid of Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan's their #1 person. They're not going to get rid of Joe Rogan. But people like Crosby, Stills and Nash said they were removing all their songs from Spotify. Who was it? Neil Diamond? Neil Diamond as well. But now Crosby, Stills and Nash have come back and said, nah, actually, can you put our songs back on Spotify, please?
We need the money and and no one's listening to us anymore.
It's almost as though Joe Rogan makes more money for Spotify than Crosby, Stills and Nash.
It's surprising.
So do you think they were just, what was it, virtue signalling? What was it?
Everything's exactly the same. This is the National Trust from earlier on. Oh, look, we've ostracised our whole audience. We better backtrack on that. Maybe it's not a good idea. Oh, look, we've said this to... Oh, now, please, can we come back? Go woke, go broke. It's not a saying. I don't understand. You see it with Disney, you see it with Star Wars, you see it with Amazon, Lord of the Rings. It's happening time and time again. Until they lose money, people you can make all your woke programmes, you can do it, no one's watching it.
So this is a really... Yeah, but this does keep... Darius makes a really good point here, because take the Star Wars example. So they made, what was the second one called? The Last Jedi. Just rubbish. The second one.
All the I don't watch.
And then they tried to undo it. They went full woke. No one liked it. The critics liked it, obviously, but no actual person liked it.
No, I don't think even the critics liked it.
No, they did. That was the point. The critics loved it. So the scores on Rotten Tomatoes were 95% from critics and 0% from fans. And they suddenly realised, oh, no one's watching this twice or buying...
Well, you know what? The friend of mine was working on that production, the last one, and they sent out a thing saying, hey, if anybody's got an ending for the film, could you come and tell the director?
That was the last one, The Rise of Skywalker, which was a mess as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
But at least it wasn't constantly pushing social justice issues.
This is it, when they're pushing, when Marvel does it, it's stuff like that stuff can fit in to a narrative and it can be told in sort of conjunction or whatever. But when that is the story or when it's sort of just plopped on top, just so they can feel good about themselves, it's so cringeworthy.
It's cringeworthy. It's a story about, it's Star Wars. It's lightsabers and robots and,
Yeah.
Don't need... And there were the gay robots anyway. The C-3PO and his lover. What was his lover called?
R2D2. People like diversity, but when it's like... So the biggest Marvel that they've had recently was the Spider-Man, and that was a diverse cast, but it wasn't like, oh, look at how progressive we are. It was just like, oh, look, he's got a black friend, or this is a black... And it just wasn't a big deal.
No problem with diversity.
No, it's only when it's like, haha, they're like the hero shop. There was a hero shot in Endgame where for no reason they just all had like a big 2-second still of all the female characters kind of beating Iron Man and saving the whole battle, and everyone was like, why now in the middle of have you ruined it with this unnecessary shot? And it just stood out like a sore thumb.
Yeah, that's the problem. Aesthetically, it's not good, is it?
No, I mean, they were quite attractive.
Oh, OK.
But
I don't think that was the point. I think you've missed the point quite spectacularly.
They couldn't run for...
It's about female empowerment, that's what it was.
They couldn't run for Tory lady.
I thought it was like lots of women in tight clothes. Okay.
No, missed it, Josh. Anyway, look, we're going to have to go to another break. After the break on Free Speech Nation, Shahrar Ali joins us to discuss his decision to run for the Green Party deputy leadership. See you in a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
To Free Speech Nation. Shahrar Ali previously held the position of Deputy Leader of the Green Party between September 2014 and August 2016. He served for 2 years before losing his bid for re-election in 2016. He's now running again for the Deputy Leadership of the party, despite the criticism he has experienced because of his views on trans rights and women's rights. Shahrar Ali, welcome to Free Speech Nation.
Thank you, Andrew.
Now, you have an interesting history with the Greens, obviously, and you are, at present, suing them, but also running for the deputy leadership. How do you square that?
Well, I have actually been challenged or criticised already the day that I actually announced my candidacy. How can somebody who's suing the Green Party stand for it? Well, it's very simple. I'm a member and I enjoy all rights to do so, and I intend to exercise them, because the party has lost its way, frankly. We've become authoritarian, and the fact that I and others actually are taking the party to court with having had gender-critical views pronounced, I think speaks volumes about the danger and the risk that we can no longer be an open party where debate is had. And by God, it needs to be had.
So can you talk people through, maybe a lot of people watching may not know the background to your legal case against the Green Party. Can you just talk us through that?
Yes, of course. I mean, I was, since being Deputy Leader in 2016, I was Home Affairs spokesperson for a number of years, and I was reappointed in 2021 as Policing and Domestic Safety spokesperson with specific brief on justice. So as a diligent spokesperson for the Green Party, I was keen to discuss topics of the day, including, for example, in policing. Why isn't sex data being collected? Including prisons, for example, where you've got bills going through the House of Lords and the Commons around single-sex provision. That's important, which any credible political party needs to have a view on. And so I was dutifully exercising my role as a spokesperson for policing and domestic safety. And some people took offence, because it's as if you can't talk about even women's right to freely associate, to discuss these things. That was one of the things I was arguing for. So the long and the short of it is that by a whole series of, I would say, institutional misdemeanour, because there were failed attempts to remove me as a spokesperson, because I have a lot of support in the party, it has to be said, and people look up to me also and others to speak out on their behalf on this topic. But through a whole series of institutional misdemeanours, I was finally removed unceremoniously without any proper evidence or basis having been given. And that's why I'm taking the Green Party to court, so that those people who have done this can and will be held accountable, and we can get our party back.
And, well, surely it's not good for the Green Party if they are perceived as having an ethos whereby discussions cannot be had.
Well, this is a wider problem of the left, actually, and we see at the moment quite a few Conservative candidates, rightly, in my opinion, staking out how they would approach the issue of women's sex-based rights, single-sex spaces, some doing a better job of it than others. And any party, whether on the left or the right, needs to have a credible position on this. The amount of rabbit-in-headlights scenarios we've had, you know, with the Labour Party leader Keir Starmer or Ed Davey, they can't answer a straight question. Well, guess what? Many of the people in the party, members like me, can answer a straight question about how to define a woman and what the relevance of that definition is. I know you had Maya Forster on, absolutely brilliant win, and she talks about the role of sex and the importance of being able to define it in life and law, and it absolutely is imperative that we continue to be able to do so.
But it's particularly important because when politicians are asked what is a woman, we all know they know the answer. So when they fudge it and claim they can't answer, then that calls into question their integrity, full stop. It suggests they're intimidated and they won't tell the truth.
Well, this is the interesting thing. I mean, I've had on the hustings already people boasting about their capacity to handle a hostile interview. And actually, reflecting on that, I thought, actually, it's not a hostile interview to be asked what is a woman and how do you define it? It's a very simple question. And that should raise alarm bells, because it's that duplicity in our politicians of today. It's that virtue signalling, whatever it is that's motivating their complete ineptitude and inability or unpreparedness to answer a straight question. That should concern us, because they can't engage in a debate which is happening publicly, on which matters on which they will have to legislate, they're going to get that policy wrong. And there are a whole series of areas where we must get this policy right.
But then what do you make of it? A lot of people, and particularly on the left, sort of say, well, these issues are just frivolous nonsense. We had Gary Lineker today tweeting saying, this is just divisive culture war nonsense. I can't remember the exact thing he phrased, but he did say divisive. It's like, this is women's rights, isn't it?
Well, you know, it's very interesting when people slip in culture war. It's a very easy way of stopping people from engaging in a debate. Now, I don't mind. If you don't want to have this debate, by all means, don't. But please don't prevent others from having it. We've had appalling scenes going back several years now where women have been deprived of the right to self-organise. And when you look at the photos, when you look at the evidence, what we're seeing is people feeling themselves empowered increasingly to be able to put on balaclavas, to be able to harass women who all they're wanting to do. I haven't even said where I stand necessarily on some of these concerns. But the idea that in the 21st century in the United Kingdom, women cannot self-organise to debate and discuss these concerns. We had Julie Bindel just a few weeks ago now. She's had to launch a campaign against Nottingham Council because they were debarring her entry to essentially a publicly funded space. They would stop her from meeting there to discuss these issues. That is appalling, and she's going to win that case. And by God, she should.
And the Greens, the history of the Greens, this is part of them. They believe in free speech, right?
Well, see, that's the thing. So this isn't just about sex-based rights and the importance of that being dealt with correctly and debated so we get the right policy. It's also about children. We've had exponential increases in girls in particular referring themselves to clinics. And, you know, we need to get beyond tribal politics as well. Sajid Javid did a very good job, actually, as Health Secretary, short-lived though he was, in making sure that the CAS review would get access to data in order to properly investigate the outcomes for children who are going through the gender identity clinic. That's important. What I was going to say, besides those matters, very important that they are, if you can't debate issues, how are we going to decide how to tackle the existential climate emergency, because that raises a whole set of issues around how far are we prepared to go in terms of protest. Do you agree with Insulate Britain's tactics, for example? I wouldn't agree with the way that they dealt in Canning Town, for example. That's not a way to win friends and influence people. But there is a big debate to be had in a very disproportionate electoral system. How are we going to win people over, even as a Green Party, where I think we should be bold? And that's my main message is this. We need to be reaching beyond our comfort zone and speaking to people who don't already necessarily agree with us. I didn't go into politics just to talk to people who already agree with me. That's a nonsense. Yeah. I want to talk and engage with people who disagree with me, because guess what? Our policy and our thinking and our rationality is so convincing and compelling. I want to win them over. And we need to win people over if we're going to crack this nut. We need people. Why aren't we double-digit figures on the national polls? Because everybody understands and the awareness is raised about the climate emergency, but we're not delivering on that. We're letting ourselves down.
And issues like this, where politicians aren't able to discuss issues relating to women's rights, that puts people off listening to your other points of view and whatever other points of view you have.
Absolutely. And I mean, my slogan for the last couple of years and this year as well is we need to get back to reality. So we need to get back to reality on basic biological truths, and we need to get back to reality on the fact that if we don't reimagine what's politically possible to fit what's scientifically necessary, we're going to be extinct.
So it is relevant. It's related.
It is.
Yes.
It is related.
Do you feel, though, that there's a lot of hostility within your party now because of the controversy surrounding you and the legal case and all the rest of it, or is there a lot of support there?
Well, no doubt there is some hostility. That's absolutely the case. There's been negative campaigning, but we are emboldened. We are emboldened by a great slew of candidates, actually. Every year we elect 50% to the Executive Committee, and I think there's a strong chance that we will have the critical mass and balance of rational opinion after this set of elections. So it's very important. People are speaking out. At conference, when we've had authoritarian motions, I mean, would you believe it? We had a motion earlier in the year to the national governing, the conference that all members are entitled to come to, which would have expelled members who had, not even while they were a member, previous to joining the party, they would have been expelled, or the euphemism is suspended, but it's the same effect, had they signed a women's rights declaration. And I think that is appalling. That shows the depth to which, and this authoritarianism, don't ever buy the assumption that the right is more authoritarian than the left. The left, arguably, the left is worse, because they do it with moral superiority, pretending that they know what's in your interest. So I didn't go into politics. When I joined 20 years ago, we were like a university of ideas. We need to get back to that, where people aren't shot down because they disagree, because disagreement is healthy. Disagreement is the means by which you improve policy and make good legislation.
And how did that happen? How did the party reach a position where they were literally threatening to expel people for expressing a different point?
Well, I think we are hostage to a minority in the party, because in any organisation, it's only a small number of people. Whether it's 50,000 members, it's only maybe 1% who come to conference, and it's a smaller number again who may have officer positions or officer roles, and they wield disproportionate power. And if they abuse that power, which is a problem I think we've never had before, if they don't understand right from wrong in their hearts, if they don't understand that a woman, for example, should have the right to choose a same-sex medical examiner after she's been violated, that is extraordinary. I defy anybody in the Green Party today to tell me that it is contrary to Green Party policy to allow the woman that basic dignity.
Well, it'll be very interesting to see the outcome of your campaign. Shara Lee, thanks very much for joining us. After the break on Free Speech Nation, we're going to be talking to stand-up comedian and author of newly released book, An Immigrant's Love Letter to the West, Konstantin Kisin. See you in a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. Our next guest arrived in Britain at the age of 13 after being born in Russia in 1982. A comedian and podcaster, he has now written a book called An Immigrant's Love Letter to the West, which examines free speech and other key modern issues. I'm delighted to welcome Konstantin Kisim. How are you, Konstantin?
I'm well, thank you.
Congratulations on the book. It's fantastic. Now, what has been the... Oh, it's not out yet. That's one thing. But what is the basic premise of the book for people who don't know?
I want to remind people in the West how important it is that we don't take for granted what we have. And more importantly even than that, to remind them that if we do take for granted what we have enemies who will take advantage of that.
Yeah, I wonder who you're thinking of in particular. But it is, you know, I haven't read a book like it. It is, you know, you're coming from the outside and you're saying, this place is great. Why are you trying to do it down all the time? Why are we doing that? When study after study says that we're not this big racist, fascist country, why do the people who live here want to see it fail?
Well, I think this version of progressivism, which I think is what you're referring to, is kind of like gout. It's a disease of prosperity. We're very fortunate in the West, and I think we feel guilty about it. We've been made to feel guilty about it. And because of that, we've imbibed this idea that we are the worst people ever. And it concerns me deeply, Andrew, because the question for me is, if you think you're a bad person, if you think you're a bad country, why would you ever defend yourself? Why would you defend your society? And we've seen in recent months, of course, that we do have enemies. People in the West have forgotten this very obvious thing, that not everybody everywhere in the world thinks as we do. Not everybody in the world wants what we do. Not everybody has the same methods as we do. And if we allow ourselves to become disillusioned with our own vision of life, then people will come and take over who do have a strong vision of what society should look like.
And you talk in the book a lot about your background, but not just your background, your family's background and your grandparents' background. That was really interesting as well. So, you know, what sort of life did they have in the Soviet system?
Well, my grandmother was born in a gulag, in a Soviet concentration camp. And many of the things that we're now seeing in society, I wouldn't compare them to the Stalinist period, but we are seeing things like you talked about earlier in the program, the singer Macy Gray. What happened with her, to me, is very reminiscent of late Soviet society in which I grew up, where people would be forced to go back on an opinion they'd expressed, and they would come out with this sort of, you know, I, Comrade Kishin, and then make a long apology which reversed the position they expressed 2 minutes ago.
Yes.
And when I see someone like Macy Gray making a strong statement, and it doesn't really matter what your view of that particular issue is, just the very fact that we now live in a society where people can be bullied into lying in public, having made a statement like that, I think we should all be very worried about that.
That's one of the criticisms that people will have, is that they will say, well, you know, there's a difference between Macy Gray appearing on 2 TV shows and reversing her position and someone being in Maoist China at a struggle session. You know, we're not quite at the gulag stage yet. What would you say to that?
Well, I don't think we are at the gulag stage, but what I'm trying to make, the point I'm trying to make is we are in the late Soviet stage. We absolutely are in the late. My grandfather made a statement about the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and was made unemployable and eventually had to leave. Is that different to what we have in modern Britain?
So why is it we can't see that? When people deride cancel culture, they say, well, cancel culture was just invented by the right. All it is we're holding people accountable for their bad views. Isn't that okay?
Well, cancel culture has been around for millennia, and we both know that. But the question is, do we want to have that sort of society? And it strikes me that we're embracing ideologies which are very hostile and alien to the very idea of the Western project, like the ones that I come from. And I was doing a bit of research for a talk I gave recently, and one of the things I came across is a guy called George Kennan. He was an American diplomat and the architect of the containment policy against the Soviet Union. And one of the things he said is that the greatest threat to us in the West is that we begin to embrace the ideas of our opponents, the ideas of our enemies. And I'm afraid it seems to me that we're doing that now.
Is there anything about the West you do dislike?
The food.
Yeah, I can see that. That's fair enough. But I mean, you came here from when you were 13, and what I didn't know actually, and you said in the book that you didn't speak the language, and so you were thrown in here. And does it take that kind of outsider's perspective to sort of appreciate what you've got?
I hope not. I hope that actually people can read the book and see for themselves through my eyes what I see here in the West. And it's just about context, Andrew. This is the thing. You know that I talk about slavery in the book, for example, and I'm deeply troubled not by the fact that we teach about slavery, but how little we teach about that issue. We teach about the transatlantic slave trade briefly, but we don't actually cover the fact that this is a practice that has been around for thousands of years. Human beings were the first good that was actually ever traded. And you have to understand the context of things in order to understand your own historical role. So I'm in favour of teaching more history, not less, so that we can understand ourselves from a set of different perspectives. I think that's really important.
Because you mentioned in the book you have relatives who were slaves.
Well, my grandfather was taken as a slave labourer to Germany. And, of course, when I say my grandmother was born in the Gulag, that means her parents were both in the Gulag.
Right.
And they were kept there because they were useful to the project of building whatever they were building.
So when you talk about all these gulags and everything, and I've seen a lot of revisionism, do you remember at Goldsmiths, those students were saying that the gulags were fine, they were like holiday camps where you could join theatre clubs and this kind of thing. But even that in itself, that revision of history, that's a very kind of Soviet idea. That's something that's creeping in more and more here. Does it trouble you when you see people wanting statues to be torn down, streets to be renamed, that kind of thing?
It troubles me only in the sense that I'm a Democrat. I believe those things should happen on a democratic basis. If the people of a city want to remove a statue and they vote to do that, I'm fine with that. It's up to the people. I'm against mobs coming around and tearing things down. But, you know, also in the book, as you know, I talk about the origins of political correctness.
Yeah.
You know, you and I both get lumped into this sort of like political correctness gone mad crowd, which neither of us is. But actually, most people don't know where political correctness comes from, and I do think it's quite important that they do. It comes from the Soviet Union, and people like my ancestors would be told, well, comrade, this is factually correct, but it is politically incorrect. And what that meant was, what you're saying is not in line with the party dogma.
Well, that's like, what is a woman?
Well, it's like what we've got now. That's my point.
Yeah, that's troubling. You also in the book talk a lot about this idea of why we don't trust the media, why we don't trust figures in authority. And could you talk to us a little bit about that and your ideas around this? Because, you know, again and again I'm running into this, that people just don't trust anyone anymore because they keep being lied to.
Well, you've said it there. Okay. It's not that complicated. I mean,
I know.
If you keep lying to people, they will stop trusting you.
Yeah.
Surprisingly. And I think it's really important, actually, that the media realise their role in their own demise. We've seen it also in the comedy industry. The comedy industry approached the idea of booking people based not on their skills and talents, but on their skin colour and sexuality, and it's now destroying itself. Fewer people are watching the mainstream comedy shows.
Yeah.
And it's the same with the media. If you keep lying to people, if you keep saying things that aren't true, if you keep calling them names for having perfectly reasonable opinions, eventually they will start switching off.
Now that you mentioned the comedy industry, because one of the things you also talk about in the book is your experience, which did become quite well known at the time, which was when you refused to sign a form saying that you would not talk about certain things on stage. And for people who are watching who may not know about that, although it did go pretty global, didn't it? What happened there?
Well, what happened was I was asked to do a gig for charity at SOAS, and they sent me a contract which said that they had a zero-tolerance policy on racism, sexism, classism, ageism, ableism, homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, xenophobia, Islamophobia, anti-religion and anti-atheism. And it also said that all jokes must be respectful and kind.
Right. I love that you've remembered all of those.
Well, I've repeated it quite a few times at this point, I'll be honest with you. But when I turned it down, that was actually an eye-opening moment for me, because I think up until that point, I sort of thought that me and you were these weird sort of free speech people, and people in the country don't really necessarily care about this issue. Yeah. But what I found was, here was an unknown comedian turning down an unpaid gig from some two-bit university, and it was the second biggest story on the BBC on the day that Theresa May, the then Prime Minister, was nearly removed from office by her own party.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, we didn't know at the time that the Tory party would keep removing its leaders every couple of years. Right. But at the time, it was a hugely significant moment. And what I think I realized at the point, or certainly thought at that point, was that actually a lot of people in the country feel that they can't say what they think. They didn't care about me or my story. They cared about the feeling that they have themselves, that they can't really say what they think for fear of punishment. And the polling shows this. I talk about this in the book, as you know. More than half of people in Britain are now fearful more than they used to be of saying what they think. And in America, 2/3 of people are afraid to express their political opinions in public. So we're in a bad place.
But it's funny because, you know, obviously I've been on your podcast right from the start and I've watched a lot of what you do, and it's always so moderate and sensible and not at all reactionary, and, you know, you don't have sort of rabid frothing at the mouth and all this sort of stuff. But that's how you are often caricatured, right? And I think I am as well. Particularly by the comedy industry, I think. So why is that happening when people can just say sensible things that, as you say, a lot of the public agree with, and yet all of a sudden we're evil?
Well, you reminded me before we started that we're before the watershed, so I won't tell you what I actually think. But I think their ideas are not very good, and therefore it's helpful to dismiss people like us instead of having to actually engage with what we're saying.
Is that simple?
I do think it's that simple, and also a lot of comedians are idiots.
I mean, yeah, I don't want to say that, but yeah, no, you're absolutely right. But you've moved away from the comedy industry more and more. You haven't done stand-up for a while. Do you think you'd ever go back to it?
I may. I've sort of taken a break, and if it lasts the rest of my life, then I'll be content with that. But it might not. I've got better things to do at the moment.
Just to go back to the book quickly, because we've got a little bit of time. You make this really interesting point towards the end of the book, where you're talking about how the implication of saying that the West is terrible, this is a horrible country, and saying this to people who are immigrants like yourself, and saying, you know, you need to be aware of how awful this is, that there's a kind of insinuation that maybe you should leave. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's a tongue-in-cheek comment,
Sure.
and what I'm really saying is, you know, you see a lot of these sort of racial justice activists or whatever on TV talking about how this is the worst country in the world, but I never see them move anywhere else. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, exactly.
And it sort of makes me think that maybe they don't really believe it, and instead they're just saying it because it helps their career.
Imagine that. Tell us a little bit about where people can buy the book and what it's called and all the rest of it, just to re-emphasise.
Well, the book is available to pre-order on Amazon. It's out on Thursday. But if you want to get a signed copy, apparently my signature devalues the book. Yeah. So if you go to my Twitter, my pinned tweet is actually you can buy it from a local bookshop. I was really keen that you'd be able to do that. And they will sell you a cheaper copy, and I will sign it.
OK. Can't say fairer than that. Constantine Kissin, everyone. Now, every week we dedicate this part of the show to the turbid waters of social media. We've just been looking at which videos have been going viral, and first up we've got this one from Sri Lanka. Right. Josh, what do you make of that?
Mate, I was there. It was a party, big time. Well, like, they don't have a clip, but there are people who went down. When you break into the President's Palace, I was saying this last night, but some of them went to his bedroom and had a sleep. Some of them, some were like eating his food, the pool. But the people I'm interested in are the people who went down and started like working out in his gym.
Oh yeah,
that's the clip that I want to see.
Well, you would, wouldn't you? Why not?
Yeah, it's like, wow, look at this equipment, the resistance training, it's amazing.
You can see why this sort of thing goes viral, can't you, Darius?
Yeah. I mean, I would go for a swim in that pool if I could get in there.
Yeah,
So,
of course. Why wouldn't you? Let's have a look at this video now. This is let's have a look. It's our new Education Secretary, Andrea Jenkins, who said she raised her middle finger because of a baying mob. Did everyone see this one? This went quite viral. Can we see this again? Oh, we can't see. We've blurred it out. We've blurred it out. Well, you know what? I understand why people get frustrated and why they get fed up and they feel that's the only way to react to the media. What do you think, Josh?
Well, is it the media? I think it's just a lot of people there. She was saying that...
But it's a mob.
Yeah, it's a mob. And she said she was having death threats. And I think it shows that she's human. And fair enough.
I mean, have you ever been swamped by anyone?
My kids?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I use the same thing. I won't do the gesture here, but there's a lot going on.
I get it. I think when you feel cornered and you feel like you just need to express yourself. But do you think that undermines people's trust in her?
I mean, I think she should run for Tory leadership.
Yeah? Well, that's our new education secretary.
Yeah.
But, you know, should she be setting an example, I suppose, is the point.
Yeah, I mean, it's not... we've moved so far away from, like, setting an example that a politician giving you the middle finger now, it's expected. It's not even shocking anymore.
Well, I don't know about this, though, because I'm pretty... Go on, sorry.
Well, she didn't go out and start groping all the...
No, she didn't. She didn't. But, like, because I worry about this, like, because there's this constant talk about how we want our politicians to be human beings, and we want to be able to relate to them as human beings. I don't really. I want them to be like robots, to just do the job. I don't want them to joke.
I've got 2 words for you. Keir Starmer.
Oh, well, there we go. You like him, though, don't you?
I do like him. That's exactly what I like about him.
I want them to have a pulse. I'm just saying that, but I don't want them to, when we have these flamboyant leaders like Trump and Johnson, I don't really want that. I admit that Trump was really funny. Yeah. Like, I used to read his Twitter feed, and it was brilliant. It was hilarious. But I don't want the leader of the free world to make me laugh. I want him to be really earnest and serious and get the job done,
Yes.
Is that not a fair point?
I think that is what people are after. I mean, Biden's pretty funny as well in his own unique way.
Yeah, in a different way, in a worrying way.
Yeah. I mean, Biden's humour can be summed up in one word.
I don't think he's got humour. I mean, this week there was another viral video of Joe Biden where he was reading from an autocue and he read... stop here, repeat line.
Yeah.
And actually, that just makes me feel a bit sorry for him, personally.
No, I do. And also, he's looking very frail.
Yes.
As well.
But isn't that just because the Americans, they like their older presidents? They do. They trust them more, I guess.
I guess maybe it's because it just takes so much money to become president over there.
Yeah, it takes a long time.
Yeah, and then you look at what happened to the younger presidents.
Yeah.
It's not good.
Let's move on now to another one. Now, this is... we have another video here. Let's have a look at this one.
I have friends who are aristocrats. I have friends who are upper class. I have friends who are, working class, but I'm not working class.
Now, do you have working class friends, Josh?
Look, I haven't actually revealed this, but Rishi and I were mates. And I was that working class person. And he was thinking that because I used to speak like, all right, mate, hey, Rishi, how you doing, mate? But I was posh as well. So.
I'll be honest, for a second I believed you. I thought this was a revelation that you actually knew Rishi Sunak. What do you think of that?
Well, you know what? Actually, this is a kind of larger thing. This is when they say, diversity, especially so this is why Leo is a friend of mine on my podcast as well, Leo Kurst.
Who's on GBNews all the time. We can't get rid of him.
Leo GBNews Kurst.
And Leo will be popping up right now.
Here comes it. He got called out from Nish Kumar because he said we want real diversity, i.e. diversity of opinion, not just skin colour. Rishi Sunak went to Winchester College, went to Oxford, fraternises in all the same members clubs as all the rest of them. They're going to say, oh, look, we've nominated the first diverse person to become the Prime Minister. But how diverse is he if he's got exactly the same beliefs, exactly the same morals, exactly the same...
Sure.
And I think this is the thing about when they say diversity, we give a real working class person. But anyway, that clip, to your point, shows that, yeah, like everyone else, he's pretty out of touch.
Well, yeah, sure, but of course he's more of the same. I mean, everyone understands that, and he's very wealthy and all the rest of it. Although that shouldn't exclude him from it, should it? Just because it's not his fault that he was born privileged. It should be the best person for the job, right?
Yeah, I mean, is he the best person for the job?
But that's a different question. I mean, do you think there's something about having another posh, not an Etonian, but the equivalent of, in that role?
Well, what are the options that are? Well, I guess, like we were talking before, there are other options.
Sajid Javid?
Sajid Javid, yeah.
Whose father was a bus driver, I believe.
Yeah. So
right,
I mean... John Major, coming from a similar background.
Wasn't his dad a clown? I honestly think that John Major has a connection with the circus. Yeah, there's something to do with the circus. It feels like I'm being mad, but I think it's true.
So he comes from the entertainment industry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I know what you're saying about like the diversity of thought, and there are two versions of that word, diversity, in a way. But yeah, I don't particularly like Rishi Sunak for other reasons.
Right, fair enough.
Well, just in terms of like what happened with his wife, and there's hypocrisy there.
Okay, with the non-dom stuff.
Yeah.
But I mean, also like this idea of the fact that Tories have lost, they need to retain the red wall.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it help not to have like a Keir Starmer kind of figure? You know, this is a very sort of Hampstead kind of figure, you know, very posh. You know, there is something to be said for having someone...
Well, I'll go back to it. I'll say her name again. Kemi...
Badenoch.
Whatever her name is. Kemi Badenoch. That's why she seems to fit those different criteria.
Yeah, OK. Who do you want to be?
Wait, is Kemi Badenoch Tory or Labour?
Tory.
Tory.
Well, you can't become the Tory leader
Yeah, I
for
understand,
Labour.
but he was talking about Keir Starmer, and you asked him, and then he's gone on about
I know.
Kemi again.
Because we go all over the place, Darius. You've got to keep up.
I'm trying to keep up.
Yeah,
I just don't know who Kemi Badenoch is.
No, well, you know, the intellectual fireworks are cracking. Right, so, finally, we've got this one. This is some skullduggery by the swimming pool. Let's have a look. OK, now, I actually feel some empathy towards this. Now, I'm going to confess this now, and I don't normally confess. When I was a kid at school, we were doing cross-country running, which I hated. I did cheat. I actually started the race, hid behind a tree, and because the race finished where it started, I just ran out, really out of breath. Because I had run, like, 3 foot. So I was actually out of breath. You know, I was a very large kid. And I got away with that. And I've never confessed that before. So if the PE teacher is watching, I'm sorry. But but that's fair enough, right? If you're not as good, you've got to use your brain. You've got to find a way around through tactics.
That guy is the guy who should be taking over the Tory party.
Absolutely. Like, because that's smart, isn't it? Because he didn't just go to the end. He actually made sure he was wet.
Yeah.
You know, at the end, and he's come back up, and I respect him for that. I don't agree with cheating, but I respect the intellect.
That's how I feel about Tories.
Is that right? Do you think that's a fair thing?
I think that was genius.
He's a genius.
Yeah, I was impressed.
Yeah, it's impressive,
Yeah,
isn't it?
it's impressive.
Have you ever cheated at anything?
Yeah, loads of stuff.
Well, you're a board game master, aren't you, Josh? So you...
No, but the whole point of board games is you do not cheat. And I had a friend of mine who's not a gamer play a game with me, and he cheated, and I'm almost...
Is he dead to you now? Is that it?
He's dead in that gaming sense. He thought it was really funny. I was like, no, the whole point of board gaming is this is a controlled environment where it's a battle of wits. Why would you want to cheat within that space?
Are you kidding? Is this the way you see it? Isn't it just a bit of fun? And...
No, it is. Is board gaming fun? No, Andrew.
Josh has thousands. You have thousands of board games.
Thousands of board games, yes.
You're like a connoisseur of board games.
No, I'm going through a mental health crisis.
But so, for instance, if I remember playing a game of Articulate once, and I got so frustrated, I flipped the board.
Yeah.
Would that bother you, that kind of behaviour?
Mate, I can't even look at you now. I'm so angry just to even hear that story.
OK. All right, fair enough, fair enough. I just think if you're going to cheat, be creative about it, you know? Yeah, that's fine. That's the moral of this story. Now, now the part where we're going to talk through some of your unfiltered dilemmas. And, of course, week after week, you are very kind and you send in your personal problems. I still don't know why you do it, but you do it, and that's really great. So here's the first one, which comes from Susan. This is the first unfiltered dilemma from Susan. She says, I'm a woman of pensionable age and thinking of transitioning. Should I be worried about prostate problems? Susan, I suspect this isn't true. I think you're winding us up here, but what would you say to
Let's get Maya back in here, and she could sort of fill her in on a bit of basic biology.
People are just poking fun because they think I talk about this subject too much.
Well, I think it's the most important subject that's going on in our world at the moment, so I agree with you.
Well, that's it, but that's the reason. I think that when people criticise, I'm like, but, you know, I'm obsessed with free speech. This is a show about free speech, and this is the topic that most directly at the moment seems to be impacting free speech.
This is the topic. This is the topic. Every day something else comes out about it, and then we're constantly talking about it because, you know, I feel sorry for just regular trans people who just want to live their lives and were going about their business, and now every day they've got to kind of justify their existence because a very small niche of trans activists are saying, we demand this, you must listen to us, and you must do this, this, and this. And it's affecting, like, just regular trans
Absolutely
people.
it
That's
is.
what I feel bad for.
We had Debbie Hayton on the show, and who's a trans woman, and she said the same thing, that actually this has done harm to the trans cause. And that's, you know, that's a tragedy as well. Anyway, let's go on to another unfiltered dilemma now. This is from Jenny. I hope this one is real, Jenny. She says, I suggested Chris Pincher would make great Prime Minister at work, but I am now being ostracised by my colleagues. Work friends no longer go to lunch with me. Isn't everyone entitled to an opinion about the future of our country? Yeah, I think that's a slightly inappropriate thing to suggest. Any thoughts on Chris Pincher?
Yeah, not good ones.
I mean, he couldn't be. I mean, his career's over at this point.
I
right?
would hope so. I mean, mind you, it is the Tories, so you don't actually, you never say never.
Isn't it strange, though, that that was the story that brought down Boris Johnson? I mean, really, that's what it was. You know, we had Partygate and all the rest of it, but actually, it was his knowledge of what was going on and the fact that he lied about that.
Yeah,
why would it be that?
Because it was the straw that broke the camel's
yeah,
back.
yeah,
That's what it was. I mean, and it was just more and more evidence, and you could just see the lies playing out in real time.
But it was funny, wasn't it? Because for ages people thought that Boris Johnson's lies were quite endearing. And I honestly had heard people say that. They didn't care that he lied. They knew that he lied, but that was just part of his knockabout charm.
Bit pincher by name, pincher by nature.
Yeah,
classic.
exactly.
I mean, everyone knew he was lying. I think the Tories were just waiting for something to go on, and thought, this is good, and we've got enough mass now, so we'll all do it.
And it worked. Final dilemma now is from Polly. Polly says, "It has been glorious weather this weekend, and I wanted to spend it with my boyfriend in the sunshine, but he refused to give up his plans to attend Comic-Con. I wondered why there was a picture of Darth Vader up there. I thought that's strange. Does he deserve another chance, or does he deserve the Darth Vader treatment?" I've never understood the Comic-Con thing, but I know that people get very, very obsessed with it, and it's like a lifestyle choice for them, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it would have cost a lot to get tickets.
Oh, really? Is it expensive?
Yeah, it's expensive.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, this is your realm with the board.
This is my realm, and I think he should break up with her.
That's right. You think there's no going back from this?
They should not be together. If she can't understand... It's like when I got together with my wife. I took her to see Annie Hall.
Yes.
I said, basically, if you don't think this is a really funny film, there's just no point us being together.
That's very militant. All right, Polly, I'm afraid the decision has been made. It's over. Anyway, thank you for joining us on Free Speech Nation. This was the week when Maya Forstater won her case for free speech and women's rights. Dodgy sex education policies in schools were exposed, and various Tory MPs started gearing up for the top job. Thank you so much to my panel, Josh Howie and Darius Davis, and to my guests. We've had Alcasego Cuthbert, Maya Forstater, Shara Ali, and, of course, Konstantin Kisin. If you enjoyed the interview with Konstantin Kisin, please do check out his new book, An Immigrant's Love Letter to the West. That's available to pre-order now. It's out in a couple of weeks. And by the way, if you want to join us live, be in our studio, be part of our wonderful audience, you can do that. Just go to www.sroaudiences.com. That's written there right on the screen now. And stay tuned for the brilliant Mark Dolan tonight. That's next. Don't forget that Headliners is on every night at 11 p.m. That is the late-night paper preview show where comedians talk you through the next day's top news stories. Thanks so much for watching Free Speech Nation. See you next week.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.